Previously on Misery.
Do you regret doing that?
No. No, I don't regret it. I think I've been looking the worst team in probably in the whole MLB. So
that ball's hit well out to right field. Marte's going.
Just to clarify what you said, just because I didn't fully understand. Did you say I'm on the worst team? Is that what you had said?
yeah, probably it looked like.
Double up. Here's a grounder right to Riley. He comes home. It's another Marlins shutout win. Right back to business. He's run at him. Give it up. Got it. Will tag him out. He'll go back to first. Double play. Incredible.
Would you believe me if I told you the Mets are only 6 games back of the third wildcard spot? Is it crazy to think that as miserable as this team is, they could get hot for 2 weeks and sneak into the playoffs? Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the June 2024 Grimace Mets. If you're new to baseball, or you didn't really tune in last season, or you just don't keep tabs on the Mets, you may be thinking, isn't that one of the McDonald's mascots? What the hell does he have to do with the New York Mets? Well, I'll be happy to tell you. We're going to jump ahead a little bit because it all started on June 12th. Mets versus Marlins at Citi Field. I was actually at this game. Look, here's a picture of me and my uncle there. We were excited to see Francisco Alvarez play, who had just come back from his thumb injury the previous day. But for now, that's beside the point. On this fateful Tuesday evening, Grimace, the McDonald's mascot, threw out the ceremonial first pitch. And with that pitch, he may have single-handedly saved the Mets season. The Mets win that game against the Marlins 10-4, and then they keep winning. 3-2 the next day versus Miami, then they sweep the Padres, then they take 2 out of 3 in Arlington against the defending World Series champs. They take 2 out of 3 in Chicago, and then sweep a 2-game series against the Big Brother Yankees. The surging Mets are taking the baseball world by storm. Grimace memes are appearing everywhere, and the vibes on the team are at an all-time high. On June 26th, after taking those 2 games from the Yankees, the Mets were 39-39. After trudging a 24-33 record through the end of May, they've crawled all the way back to 500 baseball. And now, they're just 1.5 games back of the final wildcard spot. But we'll check back in with the 2024 Mets a little later. Today's episode of Misery is much more relevant to how the Mets ended May than how they're doing in June. We're going to talk about bloopers, on-the-field gaffes and goofs, brain farts, blunders, bungles, and botch jobs, miscalculations, missteps, and mistakes. The whole 9. Everyone loves a good blooper reel, and over the years, the Mets have assembled possibly the most iconic blooper reel of all time. Allow me to take you through it. One of my favorite Mets lowlights, at least in recent years, happened back in 2021. July 18th, Mets at Pirates. The Mets' Taijuan Walker is on the mound, with Pirates infielder Kevin Newman at the plate. Bases are loaded with just 1 out. It's an 0-1 count to Newman. Walker throws a fastball inside off the plate. Newman makes weak contact. Really weak contact. It's a swinging bunt up the third base line. And then, let me pause for a second, just to explain a baseball concept for those who may not know. If a player bunts or makes weak contact down the first or third base line, you may often see the fielders actually wait to field the ball to see if the ball goes foul. This really only happens if the ball is teetering on the line between fair and foul, and sometimes if the ball goes far enough foul while still rolling, you may see the fielder swat it even further into foul territory. This is to ensure that the ball stays foul when the hope for a play at first base is dead. Thinking the ball is foul, Walker swats it towards the home dugout. But alas, the ball is called fair. Taijuan Walker then spends nearly 6 seconds arguing with the umpire and pouting before actually going to field the ball. Those 6 seconds felt like an eternity. 2 runs have already scored, and now Michael Perez is rounding third. By the time Walker reaches the ball, it's too late. He eats the throw. Newman has reached second on a 3-run swinging bunt double. Okay, well, it was scored as an RBI infield single, with Polanco and Perez scoring and Newman reaching second on Walker's error. In the arguments that took place after the play, Mets manager Luis Rojas was ejected from the game. Here's the play from another angle in slow motion. It does look like the ball barely grazes the foul line as Walker swats it away, which would make it a fair ball. Regardless, the play was unreviewable. It also ended up not mattering, as the Mets would go on to win 7-6, but it still makes for a great Metsy moment. Now, would you believe me if I told you that this Taijuan Walker situation was not the first time a Mets starting pitcher argued with an umpire while multiple runs scored? April 30th, 1990. Mets at Braves. David Cone on the bump, and Braves infielder Mark Lemke at the plate. Lemke hits a ground ball to Mets second baseman Greg Jeffries. With first baseman Mike Marshall leaving the bag to initially make a play at the ball, David Cone must cover first. It's no problem for him, though. Cone is athletic, and he gets there a step ahead of Lemke while catching the throw from Jeffries to get the third out. Or so he thought. First base umpire Charlie Williams inexplicably calls Lemke safe on the play. Cone is livid. He immediately starts yelling at Williams and getting all up in his face. All the while, Dale Murphy and Ernie Witt score on the play. Cone never even attempted the throw home. In Cone's defense, this call was atrocious, which I think makes it slightly different from the Taijuan Walker situation. Of course, many of my fellow Mets fans will disagree with me, but the Walker call was close. Maybe could have gone either way, but upon review, I can see how one would think it snags the line before Walker makes contact with it. Cone, on the other hand, beat Lemke to the base by a full step that anyone watching on TV could have seen in real time. It's hard to imagine how an umpire who was just a few feet away couldn't see that. Unfortunately, this was before replay reviews were allowed in MLB, but even considering all of that, you gotta at least try to make the play home. Argue later. Just to be clear before we go any further, I'm not going to include every single Mets fielding error in this episode. That would take forever. Normal fielding errors aren't that interesting, and every team commits them. The best fielders of all time committed errors. It's baseball, and it happens. I will include, however, a few of the funnier ones that are a little more Metsy than your standard throw over the first baseman's head. Such as how midway through the Mets' disappointing 2023, when they were already in 4th place and 8 games under 500, third baseman Brett Beatty committed an improbable error that only seemed to sum up their season to that point. It's Mets-Dodgers, July 15th, top of the 9th. Max Muncy hits a high pop-up to third. Beatty shades to his right, into foul territory, then backs up just before the outfield, and then shades back to his left, before he sprints and dives to make what surely should have been a routine play. The ball bounces off the infield dirt and nails Beatty directly in the face. Mookie Betts scores easily from third. As broadcaster Joe Davis put it, the 2023 Mets in one clip. Maybe we can even drop the 2023 for that one, Joe. Another great example of one of these Metsy errors happened 5 years earlier. It's August 20th, 2018. Mets vs. Giants at Citi Field. Zach Wheeler on the bump for the Mets, Derek Holland on for the Giants. The Mets get a run early off an RBI double from Wilmer Flores, scoring Ahmed Rosario all the way from first. However, the game amounts to a full-blown pitching duel. The Giants don't answer back until the 7th off an RBI double from Alan Hansen that scores Brandon Crawford. But with Hansen and Brandon Belt in scoring position, Wheeler gets out of the jam and keeps the game tied. 2 more innings of scoreless ball follow, and now we're heading for extras. Derek Holland has been out of the game since the 6th inning, and Wheeler was pulled in the bottom of the 8th. He had 10 strikeouts. In the 10th inning, it's now Jerry Blevins versus Will Smith. Scoreless frame for both. 11th inning, Paul Sewald and Daniel Zamora versus Reyes Maranta. Giants get McCutchen all the way to third before a Brandon Belt strikeout kills the rally. Mets get 2 men of their own on base before Jose Reyes lines out to short for the 3rd out. Another scoreless inning. 12th inning, Giants go down in order to Tyler Bachelor. Mets get 2 walks off of Derek Law, but ultimately fail to score once again. The Mets send Bachelor out for a 2nd inning in the top of the 13th, and pretty quickly it takes a turn for the worst. Bachelor gives up a single on an 0-2 count to Chase Darno, who then reaches second on a throwing error. By Bachelor. And then Bachelor throws a wild pitch to McCutchen, allowing Darno to reach third. McCutchen walks, and then promptly steals second. Joe Panik hits a pop-up to third in foul territory for the 1st out. Posey hits a ground ball to first, but the Mets are able to throw home and nail Darno at the plate. Posey reaches on the fielder's choice, and McCutchen reaches third. Before I get into Brandon Crawford's at-bat, let's take a look at the Mets' fielding alignment at this point in the game. Specifically on the left side of the field. So you got Todd Frazier at third, okay, and Ahmed Rosario at short, that's fine, and then Austin Jackson in center, and then in left field you have Dom Smith. Now, Dom Smith has played plenty of left field in his career, especially with the Mets, but he's really not a true left fielder. He is a first baseman, and a decent fielding first baseman too, but certainly not a decent fielding left fielder. He just has never had the mobility for the position. Dom Smith didn't actually start this game. He came in the 12th as a part of a double switch when the Mets brought in Bachelor for Zamora. He replaced Jack Reinhammer in left. Anyway, back to the game. Brandon Crawford at the plate, Bachelor on the mound. Ball 1 is called on a fastball that nicked the outside corner. And then Crawford hits a second fastball, almost in the exact same spot. He drops his bat and his head sinks down, disappointed in himself for his shallow pop-up to left. The ball drifts past Rosario at short, who is tracking it intensely. He runs from his position next to the second base bag, nearly right up the middle, all the way to shallow left, never taking his eye off the ball. His path takes him right in front of Dom Smith, who is also not taking his eye off the ball, and tracking it as he charges forward. Rosario waves him off, but Smith doesn't see the gesture, and just as Rosario makes the catch, Smith runs directly into his back. Rosario drops the ball, McCutchen scores, and the Giants lead 2-1. McCutchen was later quoted saying that he laughed all the way to the dugout. In the bottom of the inning, the Mets went down in order, and the Giants won. Smith, of course, was charged with the error. Over 15 years before the Dom Smith-Ahmed Rosario collision, another Mets outfielder made an infamous error in a game against the San Francisco Giants. Let's go back to August 12th in the year 2000. It's the top of the 4th inning. So far, the only run of the game has been scored from Mets shortstop Mike Bordick's solo home run in the bottom of the 3rd, off of Giants pitcher Sean Estes. Now, Mets pitcher Mike Hampton finds himself in a bit of trouble. Giants second baseman Jeff Kent hits a double down the right field line. Then Ellis Burks reaches on an E6 from Bordick. The next batter, Rich Aurelia, grounds out to third, but allows both Kent and Burks to advance. With 2 men in scoring position, Giants first baseman JT Snow is hit by a pitch. Bases loaded, with only 1 out. Remember that. Only 1 out. Only 1 out. Into the batter's box steps catcher Bobby Estalella. He fouls off a pitch, then takes a strike, and a ball, and then fouls off a couple more. On the 1-2 count, he then hits a ball deep to left field. Would you happen to remember back in the first episode when I interviewed fans at Citi Field and one of them said this?
Benny Agbayani throws it into the stands with 2 outs.
Well, this is Mets left fielder Benny Agbayani. He's a fan favorite, actually, and had some really good years and great moments for the Mets. This was not one of them. Agbayani tracks the ball and makes the catch, which is great, and what we wanted him to do. Thanks, Benny. You can go ahead and throw that back to the infield. Wait, Benny? What are you doing? Oh no, Benny, no! There's only 2 outs! That's only the second out! Oh no! Oh, that poor kid. Oh god. Wow. Kent and Burks both score on the error, and JT Snow makes it all the way to third. Giants now lead 2-1. The Mets ended up winning this game on the back of some late-inning heroics by Todd Zeal, but that moment where Agbayani forgot the number of outs and gave the live ball to a little kid, and then had to take that ball back from the kid in order to stop the third run from scoring, will forever live in Mets infamy. You might be starting to sense a theme here, but this, of course, was not the first or last time a Met forgot how many outs there were. In fact, just last year, on August 25th, 2023, the entire Mets team forgot how many outs there were. In a home game against the Angels, in the top of the 6th inning, with 1 out, Angels outfielder Hunter Renfroe hit a ground ball to third. The ball was caught by Jonathan Arauz, who threw it to Danny Mendick at second to force out Logan O'Hoppe, who then threw to Pete Alonso to convert an inning-ending double play. The only problem was that the Mets didn't know it was an inning-ending double play. None of the Mets, including outfielder Tim LeCastro, who converted the first out of the inning, made any motion back to the dugout, except maybe pitcher Kodai Senga, who looks like he may have gestured to Alvarez that there were in fact 3 outs. Now, the funniest part about this to me isn't even that the Mets forgot the number of outs. It's these 2 lines from Mets broadcasters Gary Cohen and Keith Hernandez.
No idea how many outs there are. I don't know if Buck Showalter's ever seen this before, but I know I haven't. An entire team did not know it was the 3rd out.
I've never seen almost the whole team.
Why is this so funny to me? Well, because 6 years earlier, in a game that Gary Cohen and Keith Hernandez called, the Mets did the exact same thing. In an August 19th, 2017 home game against the Miami Marlins, in the top of the 3rd inning, Marlins outfielder Giancarlo Stanton hit into an inning-ending double play converted by Ahmed Rosario, Asdrubal Cabrera, and Dom Smith. And once again, no Met left the field, much to the confusion of Gary and Keith.
That ends the inning, doesn't it?
Yeah. Come on, guys.
Didn't Worley make the first out?
He struck out. Come on off, guys.
Does nobody on the field realize there are 3 outs?
Hello?
That's unbelievable.
Guys, come on in.
I've seen one player forget how many outs there were. I've never seen an entire team not know how many outs there were.
Hey, there's really only so many blunders that a baseball team can make, so a franchise like the Mets is bound to repeat themselves. Now, it's not always just the players that make errors. Sure, they're the ones who get charged with them in the box score, but managers can make boneheaded mistakes just as well. Take Mets manager Mickey Callaway, for example, who served as the team's skipper from 2018 to 2019. Callaway was hired after the previous Mets manager, Terry Collins, retired at the end of 2017. Throughout Callaway's tenure with the Mets, fans pretty much universally disliked him. The team underperformed in both of the 2 full seasons he was there. He consistently made questionable bullpen decisions, and he made his way into the headlines for off-the-field stuff more than once, which we'll get into in another episode. One of Mickey Callaway's most infamous blunders happened on May 9th, 2018. Oh, hey, that's my birthday. I turned 19 that year. Anyway, let's go to Cincinnati. It's May 9th, like I said, and the Mets are playing the Reds. It's the top of the 1st inning, and Sal Romano is on the bump for the Reds. Nimmo goes down looking, Flores goes down swinging, and now Asdrubal Cabrera is up. And boom, he smacks a ground rule double. It's a perfect opportunity for Mets slugger Jay Bruce to bring him home and generate some early offensive pressure, something the Mets sorely lacked in the late 2010s. But wait. Reds manager Jim Riggleman comes out of the dugout to talk to the plate umpire Gabe Morales. After a brief discussion, Bruce is immediately called out, and the inning is over. Callaway doesn't even argue. He knows what's wrong, and he knows it's his fault. He knew as soon as Wilmer Flores was called into the batter's box. The Mets were batting, out of order. The public lineup and the one posted in the Mets dugout had Flores batting second and Cabrera third, which is what the Mets were following. But in the lineup card shown to the umpires, that order was reversed. Later on, Callaway said that the lineup he wanted was the one shown to the umpires, so he recognized the mistake as soon as Flores came out to bat. Unfortunately, once they're out there, you can't rectify it. Batting out of order is not a mistake that is made often in baseball. The crew chief of that game, Jerry Meals, who had been an umpire in the big leagues since 1992, said that he had never seen it happen in the majors, only the minors. Since the beginning of the expansion era in 1961, it's only happened around 40 times, basically once every few years. It also, at least as of so far this year, has not happened since. Now, a less anger-inducing and probably funnier managerial blooper happened with the Mets way back in 1999. You might actually know this one, as it has since become a popular part of Mets lore. For that reason, I feel like I kind of have to mention it, at least, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. It's June 9th, 1999. The Mets are tied 3-3 against the Blue Jays in a 12th inning stalwart. Pat Mahomes, yes, the father of that Pat Mahomes, is on the mound for New York. The Blue Jays' Shannon Stewart is on first base, and he's threatening a steal. Mets manager Bobby Valentine calls a pitch out, which is when the pitcher intentionally throws a fastball far out of the zone, usually up and outside, so that the catcher can easily throw out a runner at second if they decide to go for the steal. Piazza catches the pitch out and throws to second, but the umpire calls the play off. He calls Piazza for a catcher's interference, giving the batsman first and advancing Stewart to second. Valentine disagreed with the call, and gave home plate umpire Randy Marsh a piece of his mind. He was promptly thrown out of the game. Now, upon entering the clubhouse, Valentine was confronted by Mets pitcher Orel Hershiser and third baseman Robin Ventura. He told them what had happened, and apparently, the two of them egged him on to go back to the dugout, but in disguise. Hershiser and Ventura gave him a hat and sunglasses, and then Valentine himself grabbed two eye black stickers and pasted them under his nose to form a fake mustache. He then attempted to subtly enter the dugout once more, where the broadcast cameras caught him immediately. The crew was hysterical. The Mets eventually won that game in the 14th inning, and Valentine was suspended for 2 games and fined $5,000 for his antics. Piazza, who was responsible for that catcher's interference, was one of the best players in Mets history, and one of the best catchers of all time. We've talked a little bit about him before. He's one of the few players in the Hall of Fame with a Mets hat on. The Mets acquired him 1 year earlier than the Bobby Valentine incident in May 1998 from the Florida Marlins. There was just one problem, though. The Mets already had an all-star catcher. Todd Hundley was an all-star for the Mets in 1996 and 1997, slugging 41 and 30 homers those years, respectively. He also wasn't included in the deal for Piazza, so what were the Mets to do with him? Well, desperate to keep his bat in the lineup, but with John Olerud already occupying first base, where catchers usually convert to, the Mets moved Todd Hundley to left field. It was a disaster. About as much of a disaster as it could have possibly been. Hundley was just far too slow to play the outfield. He had the 8th worst fielding percentage of any outfielder that year, and had played far more games than any of the 7 players above him, even if it was only 34. His season was cut short that year from an elbow injury, and on December 1st he was traded to the Dodgers. In an SB Nation article from 2013 about the Tigers moving Miguel Cabrera back to third base, Grant Bisbee writes, "I remember heckling Todd Hundley from the left field bleachers at Candlestick when he tried to play left field. After 6 innings, everyone got real quiet. We were watching someone's career melt, and we all knew it. There was no way Hundley could play the outfield, and the Mets had just acquired Mike Piazza. It was depressing." Pretty much no footage exists of Hundley's left field tenure, but back in 2018, Roger Cormier of GoodFundies.com collected some anecdotes from Mets fans who remember that brief time. Here are a few. "My big memory of it is kind of like a vine. I want to say it was Mike Lieberthal who hit the ball, and when it was hit, the stadium kind of drained of air for a moment. It wasn't going to be a homer, but the ball was smoked to left. Hundley started running in, and it was just like, where is he going? It wasn't like he was going to play the carom, he thought he was going to catch it. And the ball got to where he was, and he jumped, and it went way over his head, because of course it did. Then he had to turn around and chase the ball, and I just had the thought that this was what I must have looked like as an outfielder before getting moved to catcher. But Hundley had the good fortune to be at Shea Stadium with a fence rather than Red Hook or Prospect Park, where I chased down so many balls I had similarly misjudged onto neighboring fields. The other part I remembered is that nobody seemed upset at Hundley. It was just like, yeah, this is what happens when you put a catcher there. LOL Mets before LOL Mets was a thing, I guess. But really, I was feeling bad for him because he was stuck out there and they kept hitting balls to left field, and at least in my memory, it was a disaster every time, although I imagine he did make at least a couple plays out there. From Jesse Spector. He would do the death circle under the fly ball. Later that year, Chili Davis, with the Yankees at the time, was pressed into outfield service after a long stint at DH and said something along the lines of, "I may be a little rusty, but I'm not going to pull a Hundley out there." From Mike McCarthy. I vividly remember Todd having fun with the fact that he was awful. After a routine fly ball that he actually caught, he threw his fists in the air as the crowd sarcastically cheered. He was laughing. It was funny. I felt bad for the guy in a way. From Josh Ebbard. Players get put at positions they are uncomfortable with all the time, and yes, they usually go very poorly. I mentioned Miguel Cabrera at third before. Even Piazza had a sucky stint at first base. One thing I haven't even mentioned is that playing out of position often negatively affects a player's offensive performance as well, even though it doesn't seem related, because the mental side of the game is hard to quantify. In the 54 games Todd Hundley played that season, with 34 of them being in left, he only hit 3 home runs and batted .161. And look, I wasn't even alive to have experienced it, but it seems to me that there was something about Todd Hundley's struggles that season that really struck a melancholic chord with all those who watched. It was like purgatory for him. You just knew that with how good Piazza was and just how abysmal Hundley was playing in left, that it had to be the end, despite how good he had been the previous 2 years. You were watching someone's career melt. And of course, Hundley's career never really recovered from that, even with the Dodgers. He was plagued by injuries until his retirement in 2003. Here's another story that loosely involves Hundley. Back in 1996, on May 11th, the Mets held a John Franco Day to commemorate their closing pitcher who had just recently recorded his 300th career save. The Mets were playing the Cubs. In the first inning, Kevin Foster, of the Cubs, threw a fastball at Todd Hundley's head. In the second inning, Mets pitcher Pete Harnisch retaliated and threw a fastball at Kevin Foster that drilled him in the side. When Harnisch came up to bat in the next inning, he and catcher Scott Servais exchanged words. All was well and fine until the 5th inning, when Harnisch came up for his 3rd at-bat. Cubs pitcher Terry Adams threw a pitch at Harnisch's knee that ended up behind him. More words were exchanged between Harnisch and Servais until Harnisch swung a right hook, nailing Servais in the face. Benches cleared, and before long a whole brawl ensued. Even the coaches got involved. In total, 9 players were ejected, including Servais and Harnisch, of course. But of those 9 ejections, there's only one I'm interested in. John Franco. Yes, that's right. On John Franco Day, John Franco was ejected from the game. Couldn't have gone any other way. Bartolo Colon pitched for the Mets from 2014 to 2016 in his age 41, 42, and 43 seasons. If you couldn't already tell, he doesn't really have the body of a world-class athlete either. His stature led Mets fans to give him the affectionate, albeit ironic nickname, Big Sexy. Nevertheless, the short, old, fat Bartolo Colon made 30-plus starts each year of his Mets tenure. He was still very effective on the mound, pitching to a 3.9 ERA with the Mets in those 3 seasons. He also played for 2 more seasons after that, retiring at 45 after a stint with the Texas Rangers. Bartolo Colon had been pitching since 1997. The Mets were his 8th team, and he'd go on to play for 3 more after them. He won a Cy Young Award with the Angels in 2005, and in 2016 it was revealed that he had a secret second family with 2 kids. Bartolo Colon also could not hit. Back before the universal DH, pitchers weren't usually expected to be good hitters. Some were, like Madison Bumgarner, Zach Greinke, or even the Mets' own Jacob deGrom. But most weren't. And then, after 50 feet of crap, you had Bartolo Colon. Bartolo Colon had a career slash line of 084, 092, 107. He was beyond abysmal at the plate. Why, you might ask? Well,
Colon pitched in the American League for almost his entire career, up until he played for the Mets.
the American League always had a DH, so pitchers never had to go up to bat like they do in the National League, which is where the Mets play. So Colon didn't have to take regular at-bats for 17 years in the big leagues, until he played for the Mets. He just had no idea what he was doing up there. Most of the time, when a pitcher was up to bat, they would normally be asked to lay down a bunt, or to not swing at all in order to avoid the risk of injury. Not Bartolo, though. He had a tendency to swing out of his shoes as hard as he could, with almost no hope of making contact. Okay, yeah, that's just a figure of speech. He didn't literally swing out of his shoes. He did, however, swing out of his helmet.
Go Sunday.
And then came May 7th, 2016.
Malone looking for his first hit of the year.
He drives one, deep left field. Back goes Upton, back near the wall. It's out of here! Bartolo has done it! The impossible has happened! The team vacates the dugout as Bartolo takes the long trot. His first career home run. And there will be nobody in the dugout to greet him. This is one of the great moments in the history of baseball. Bartolo Colon has gone deep.
With that swing, Bartolo Colon became the oldest player in MLB history to hit their first career home run, just over 2 weeks prior to his 43rd birthday. Gary Cohen's call is electric, but listen to the roar of the crowd once Bartolo makes contact. That's an away game for the Mets. They are 3,000 miles away from New York in San Diego.
Bartolo has done it! The impossible has happened!
Everyone knew the significance of that moment. Bartolo is universal. It's now August 23rd, 2009. We're watching the Mets take on the defending champion Phillies. Top of the ninth, with 2 outs. Phillies second baseman Eric Bruntlett is up to bat against Elmer Dessens. He's 3 for 4 on the day, and he hopes to add another by smacking a line drive to right center field. Mets right fielder Jeff Francoeur, who the team just picked up from the Braves a month prior, makes a spectacular diving catch to rob Bruntlett of his 4th hit. However, when the ball hits his glove, it recoils into the grass, making it seem as though he dropped the ball. The umpire calls Bruntlett safe. Arguments ensue, and Francoeur runs all the way in from the outfield to make his case, and Mets manager Jerry Manuel also gets involved. The umpires confer and ultimately overturn the call in the field,
which pisses off Phillies manager Charlie Manuel,
since there was no replay review. The half inning is over, and the Mets are due up in the bottom of the ninth. Angel Pagan leads off, and he makes it all the way to third on what is scored as an E3, though I feel like it should have just been scored a triple since I don't think Ryan Howard even touched the ball. Luis Castillo is up next, and he scores on an error committed by Bruntlett, bringing Pagan home. 9-7 now. Daniel Murphy at the plate now, and he hits an infield single back to Bruntlett that maybe also should have been scored an error. He pushes Castillo to scoring position. There's 0 outs. Murphy represents the tying run at first base. Jeff Francoeur is the winning run at the plate. The Mets have a genuine shot at a comeback, and all it's taken is some good luck.
2-2. The runners go.
And then the universe balances out.
He makes the tag. It's a triple play, and the ball game is over.
Of course, luck is a big part of baseball as a whole. It's just in the nature of the game. A ball takes a bad hop and the game is over. And luck, be it good or bad, seems to be heavily intertwined with the Mets franchise. Their first World Series win was a total fluke run, and their second one was achieved off the back of an E3. And yet, even in their high payroll, star-loaded years, they have had extraordinary circumstances of bad luck, as we've seen in this very series. Luck can usually be mitigated to a certain extent with talent. Unless you're the Mets. Back in 2021, the Mets experienced one of these years. They had the third highest payroll in the league and had just signed Francisco Lindor to a $341 million contract. I already discussed the 2021 season in the first episode, but in case you missed it, they spent 103 days in first place and then spiraled to third by September. In the midst of their collapse, a controversial series of events occurred. At the trade deadline, the Mets acquired Cubs shortstop Javier Baez in exchange for Mets number 5 prospect Pete Crow Armstrong. Lindor was injured at the time, so the Mets were filling in the hole he left at shortstop to try and hang on to their divisional lead. Well, shortly after that trade, throughout the month of August, was when the Mets began to spiral. And Mets fans, being New Yorkers and all, were not shy about letting the team know their disappointment. With every loss, the home boos got louder and louder, until finally, the newcomer Baez couldn't take it anymore. It's Sunday, August 29th. The Mets are already in third place. They've just come off a 2-11 stretch against the Dodgers and Giants, 2 actual playoff teams. But now the Mets get to face off against the tanking Washington Nationals, a team that would go on to finish last in the NL East, 32 games under 500. The Mets lost the first game of the series, because of course they did. But they won yesterday, the 28th, and are beating up on the Nats now, as they should. The Mets started feeling a bit arrogant after that, and decided to let the fans know about their disappointment in them. After hitting a 2-run homer, Javier Baez flashed 2 thumbs down at the crowd while crossing the plate. Francisco Lindor and Kevin Pillar followed suit after collecting base hits of their own. The Mets won against the lowly Nationals 9-4. Javier Baez, when questioned about the incident, was shockingly honest. It was the players' response to Mets fans booing them. Kevin Pillar and Marcus Stroman denied that being the reason for the gesture, but it was all too late. The media firestorm came in. Mets fans were rightfully upset, and Baez's comments were condemned in a statement by Mets president Sandy Alderson, who defended the fans' right to boo when the team is underperforming. There's an adage that's often repeated whenever a pitcher throws a shit fit about someone bat flipping a home run off of them. If you don't want them to celebrate, don't give up the home run. Well, if you don't want to be booed at home, maybe don't suck. Maybe don't be the reason the team completely collapses upon itself and falls out of playoff contention. Just a thought. And look, I'm not going to sit here and rip on those guys too much. Lindor is a huge part of the current Mets roster and should receive serious NL MVP consideration this year if the Mets keep up their hot streak. And I get it. It is frustrating to have home fans boo you when you're supposed to be in a safe environment. But at the end of the day, the moment was undoubtedly embarrassing. It just felt like the players didn't want to take responsibility for their actions. There's 2 more stories I want to briefly discuss before I jump into the next section. The first one is this. It's June 2nd, 2005. Diamondbacks at Mets, Shea Stadium. Pedro Martinez on the bump, Luis Gonzalez at the plate, 2-2 count. Martinez throws a fastball just outside.
The 2-2.
Gonzalez fouls it back.
Got a piece of
Martinez
got a good piece of it, and actually had a very good swing. Oh, look at this. There go the sprinklers.
Just please hold on to that for a few minutes for me. The second one is this. If you watched the previous episode, you're familiar with Ryan Church, the power-hitting, rising star outfielder whose career was never the same after the Mets medical staff mishandled his concussions in the 2008 season. Well, we're gonna jump back to the year after that, in 2009. May 18th, Mets-Dodgers. We're already in extras. It's the top of the 11th inning, and the game is tied 2-2.
With Mets center fielder Angel Pagan up to bat and Church on first,
Pagan cranks a liner to deep right center. Church makes it all the way around to score from first, and the speedy Pagan reaches safely on a triple. The Mets have taken the lead. Oh, but wait, what's this?
They're thinking that the bag at third was missed, and it was missed by Ryan Church. Ryan Church mistouching third base.
Church is called out at third on the appeal play. He never touched the bag. You might also remember from the last episode that after Church was traded and David Wright later got a concussion, Mets manager Jerry Manuel publicly shamed Church and compared his struggle with concussion symptoms to David Wright's ability to power through it. Jerry Manuel never really liked Ryan Church. After this play, during the post-game press conference, he completely threw Church under the bus. That Ryan Church misstep, and manager Jerry Manuel's reaction, has become one of the many infamous examples of Mets dysfunction. And of course, like so many other examples on this list, it is mirrored by another event that occurred decades earlier. This is the moment that I presume many of you viewers familiar with the Mets may have been waiting for. You may have noticed that we've left this side of the diamond awfully blank. Well, for the first time in this series, we're going way back, all the way, to 1962, the Mets' inaugural year. This is Marv Throneberry. Marv Throneberry was acquired in a trade with the Baltimore Orioles about 17 games into the 1962 season, in exchange for a player to be named later and cash considerations. The player to be named later ended up being Hobie Landreth, the catcher taken with the Mets' first pick in the expansion draft. After being mostly a pinch hitter with the Orioles, Throneberry was now the Mets' starting first baseman. He quickly became a fan favorite, the first in Mets history. He was known as Marvelous Marv, somewhat ironically for his hilarious gaffes on the field. Arguably the most famous of which happened on June 17th, which you'll notice is very similar to the series of events I just described in regards to Ryan Church. Mets versus Cubs, bottom of the first. Marvelous Marv comes up to bat with 2 men on and 1 out. Throneberry cranks out a triple and drives in 2. But wait, what's this?
Charlie Neal at the plate. There's 1 man out. Throneberry leads down the line at third. Hobby steps off the rubber and throws over to first base, and he is out at first base on an appeal play. And in the field play, Dusty Boggess says that Throneberry missed first base. Hobby threw over to Ernie Banks, and Boggess has called Throneberry out for missing first base. He repeats the call 3 times. See, the ball is not yet in play until the pitcher is on the rubber. Hobby took his place on the rubber, threw over to Banks, who tagged the bag. Throneberry has been called out, and he is now coming reluctantly down the line toward the dugout. Dusty Boggess, the umpire at first, has called Throneberry out, saying that he missed first base. So there are 2 men out. No count to Charlie Neal, of course. Glenn Hobby had to get up there on the rubber, put the ball in play that way, and then throw over to first to Ernie Banks. It is an appeal play, and on the appeal it is sustained by Boggess.
Throneberry missed first base. He was out on the appeal play.
as the story goes, Mets manager Casey Stengel yelled at the umpire,
claiming that Marv indeed did touch first, to which the umpire responded, "Don't bother arguing, Casey. He missed second base too." Well, I know damn well he didn't miss third. He's standing on it. The next batter up, second baseman Charlie Neal, hit a bomb.
And the runner is out. Here's Mr. Charlie Neal is going to left field. It's deep. It's going, and it is bound for a home run. The score is tied 4-4.
Allegedly, Casey Stengel came out of the dugout, waving his arms frantically for Neal's attention,
and pointed at each base to make sure Neal didn't miss any. Even more so than his awful base running, Marv Throneberry was known for his fielding blunders as well. In fact, in this very game with the triple mishap, he also botched a rundown in the first inning and was called for obstruction. He committed 3 errors in a game just a few days later, on the 22nd, and finished with 17 on the year, in only 97 games. That's a 28.3 error pace over 162 games. His .981 fielding percentage that year was the worst by a first baseman until 1979. In fact, one day, after some teammate's birthday celebration, Throneberry became irate at the fact that no one saved him any of the cake.
To which Stengel replied,
"We were gonna save you some, but we was afraid you'd drop it." I'm gonna go on a slight tangent here. I love Marv Throneberry, and as I mentioned before, I'm not alone. He was crazy popular amongst fans. He even had his own fan club of 5,000 strong that would come to games and chant, "Cranberry, strawberry, we love Throneberry." At the end of the 1962 season, through the Mets organization, Throneberry and Mets center fielder Richie Ashburn both won boats. Chris Craft cabin cruisers, to be precise. Ashburn won his for being voted as the Mets MVP of the season, while Throneberry won his as a part of a promotion the Mets held with their players, where the player who hit the Chris Craft sign in the outfield with a batted ball the most throughout the season would win said boat. Here's the catch. For tax purposes, Ashburn's boat was a gift, since he was awarded the boat by a vote from New York sports writers. Throneberry's boat, on the other hand, was taxable, since he had earned it from hitting home runs at the sign in the outfield. And so every year, for some time long after he played his last game for the Mets, Throneberry had to pay taxes on a boat he didn't even really want in the first place. At least it didn't sink, like Ashburn's boat. Not one of these stories that I've already told is my personal favorite about Throneberry. So, he's Marvelous Marv, right? And we can assume, and most people do assume, that this nickname just sort of happened. Most nicknames do. We don't really get to choose our own nicknames. His career as a Met was defined by these hilariously bad moments on the field, and the nickname was adopted by the fans as a sort of irony or joke. It's endearing, right? Well, actually no. Not quite. In 1962, everyone in the Mets locker room had a card above their locker, which had their name and number. One day, Marv comes up to pitcher Jay Hook. He says, "Jay, you're an engineer, aren't ya?" "Yeah." "Engineers can print real good, can't they?" "Yeah, I took some drafting classes." Throneberry goes over to his locker, pulls out the card, and turns it over. He brings it over to Jay with a felt-tip pen. "Write Marvelous Marv on this card, would ya?" So Jay Hook printed Marvelous Marv on his locker room card, and Marv slipped it back in above his locker. After the game that day, all the writers came into the locker room to talk to the players. They gathered around to talk to Throneberry, sitting below his Marvelous Marv card. And from that point on, he was just called that. No fans came up with the nickname. No sports writer. Marvelous Marv came up with it himself. He put it on his locker, and the rest is history. Throneberry was born to be a Met. He was, and in many ways still is, the perfect representation of the Mets organization in one player. His initials even spell it out. And that's also kind of remarkable to think about, considering he only played one full year with the team. He played most of 1963 with AAA Buffalo and never appeared in a Mets game again, or even a Major League Baseball game at that. In the 70s, well after his retirement, he became known for a series of self-deprecating Miller Lite commercials.
You know, it used to take 43 Marv Throneberry baseball cards to get one call for Rilla. So I was surprised when the light beer people called me to do this commercial. I mean, I do drink light beer, and it tastes great. It's got a third less calories than their regular beer, and it's less filling. But, you know, I'm kind of worried, because if I do for light beer what I did for baseball, I'm afraid their sales might go down.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer, and less.
But that was it. I'm gonna go on another tangent here because, well, let's face it. I have to talk about the 1962 Mets at some point, and I think this might be the best opportunity I'm going to get. The team was cursed from the start. This is the Chase Hotel. We're in St. Louis, Missouri. It's April 10th, 1962, opening day for the very first season of the New York Mets. It's the late afternoon, probably 4 or 5 o'clock, and the ace of the Mets pitching staff, 32-year-old Roger Craig, heads from his room to the hotel elevator, along with 6 or 7 of his teammates. They get in and press for the first floor. The elevator stops far sooner than it was supposed to, and when the doors don't open, these Mets realize that they're in trouble. They call for help and bang on the walls to get anyone's attention, but to no avail. A pre-recorded message repeats itself over and over again. Vicky Carr is singing on the rooftop nightclub tonight. Vicky Carr is singing in the rooftop nightclub tonight. Roger Craig erupts. Tell her to get off the freaking roof and open up this elevator. And then, after an hour of restlessness and anxiety, the elevator just started up again. It reached the first floor, and one by one the Mets walked out, finally ready to head to Busch Stadium and play the Cardinals for opening day. And then they got to Busch Stadium and it started raining, and it kept raining, until finally they decided the game was rained out. It's April 11th, 1962. Opening day for the very first season of the New York Mets. And this is how that season went for them. They lost their first 9 games and later went on a 17-game losing streak as well, ultimately finishing with the worst record in the modern era, 40-120. A record for most losses in a season that still stands today, as of 2024. They finished 10th in the National League, 60.5 games behind the Giants, 18 games behind the 9th place Chicago Cubs, and 24 games behind the Colt 45s, which was the other National League expansion team. Why were the Mets so bad in 1962? Well, in 1960, after facing the threat of a third Continental League forming, MLB decided to expand. In 1961, 2 teams were added to the American League, the Los Angeles Angels and the Washington Senators. And in 1962, 2 teams were then added to the National League, the Houston Colt 45s and the New York Mets. The leagues planned to fill out the new rosters with expansion drafts, where existing teams allow certain players of theirs to be drafted by the new teams. The American League teams held their draft in December of 1960, and the National League held theirs in October of 1961. Now, the difference between holding an expansion draft in October versus December is significant because of something called the Rule 5 draft. The Rule 5 draft has been going on every December since 1920. Teams protect certain players and leave others unprotected for any team to take. The idea is to stop teams from stockpiling young players in their minor league system when they could be getting major league playing time on another team. The American League held their expansion draft after the 1960 Rule 5 draft, meaning that teams across the league had already cut all of their ineffective or washed-up players. The National League held their draft immediately after the 1961 season's end and before the Rule 5 draft, so teams could protect anyone remotely competent and only offer their worst players to be drafted, the players they were going to leave unprotected in the Rule 5 draft anyway. This significantly weakened the player pool available to the Mets and Colt 45s in comparison to the Angels and Senators. In addition to this, the Mets just seemed to have a questionable draft strategy. Every single player they picked was either A, completely washed up, or B, a career minor leaguer. As we see here, the Colt 45s, under the exact same circumstances, still managed to pick a somewhat respectable team. As questionable as it was, however, it was still a strategy. It was all premeditated by the president of baseball operations, George Weiss, whose idea was to fill the team up with aging veterans and past stars to sell tickets in the team's early years while they built up their farm system. And what's crazy is that it actually worked. Don't get me wrong, the early 60s Mets were a complete disaster pretty much every year. They effectively ended the career of Hall of Famer Richie Ashburn, one of the past stars the Mets acquired to sell tickets. Richie played really well for the Mets, even at age 35, but in the Mets' final game that year against Ashburn's former team, the 9th place Cubs, Ashburn was one of 3 Mets to fall victim to a triple play. Joe Pignatono, the Mets catcher, popped into it. It would end up being his last plate appearance ever in the Bigs. Joe Pignatono is the only player in history to end his career by hitting into a triple play. It was really the perfect nightcap to that 1962 year. That was also Ashburn's last game. Upon pondering his future in Major League Baseball, he apparently lamented that if he ever had to be a bench warmer for the New York Mets, he would commit suicide. But anyways, as I was saying, Weiss's strategy, to some extent, actually worked. In the early 60s, fans came out in droves to see the Mets, precisely to see players like Ashburn, but also former Brooklyn Dodgers players like Duke Snider and Gil Hodges. And while they were bad, they built up their farm system and eventually won the 1969 World Series out of nowhere, on the back of their 1966 second-round draft pick, Tom Seaver. But we'll talk about that more in a later episode. For now, I want to tell a story about those 2 Dodgers players, Gil Hodges and Duke Snider. In the offseason between 1962 and 63, the Mets purchased Duke Snider from the now LA Dodgers for $40,000. Duke was now 36 years old and certainly on the tail end of his playing days, although he was named an All-Star for the 8th and final time of his career. Early on in the 63 season, the Mets traded the beloved Gil Hodges to the Washington Senators. Hodges was already 39 years old, often injured, and no longer playing very well. When the Washington Senators acquired him, they actually converted him to manager. He was traded for a center fielder named Jimmy Pearsall. Pearsall already had a bit of a reputation. He publicly struggled with bipolar disorder, particularly during his time with the Red Sox in his earlier years. He actually wrote a memoir about it in 1955 called Fear Strikes Out, which eventually was adapted into a movie where Pearsall was played by Anthony Perkins. On the Red Sox, he was known for getting into fights with people, most notably getting into a fist fight with New York Yankee Billy Martin. The Red Sox demoted him to the minors in 1952, and he actually underwent electroshock therapy at a mental institution over the course of 6 weeks. That's the 1950s. Yikes. Anyway, before I get further into this, I just want to say I do not intend to make light of someone's mental health struggles, and so I wanted to provide some context before I delved into his season with the Mets. After Duke Snider hit his 400th career home run, Pearsall claimed that he would receive more publicity for hitting his 100th career home run. About a week and a half later, on June 23rd, Pearsall hit his 100th career home run off of Phillies pitcher Dallas Green. He then proceeded to run around the bases, facing backwards. That's one way to get publicity. Oh, Jimmy. There's a couple other Jimmy Pearsall stories I want to tell, but for what it's worth, I cannot say with certainty that they are true. One of them is this. When he was initially brought over to the Mets from Washington, his jersey number of 37 was already taken.
By Stengel.
Apparently, he asked GM George Weiss if he could be number 37A, to which he was met with a no, of course. The second story is that Topps Trading Cards were planning to release a Jimmy Pearsall High Series card as a Met. Jimmy apparently called the president of Topps to let him know that he didn't think he would be with the team much longer. He was released a week later. There is so much more to talk about with the 1960s Mets, and some of them I will save for future episodes, but first, 2 more quick stories. My absolute favorite story about these 60s Mets happened in 1964. I think it's a great example of how people viewed the Mets during this time. On May 26th, the Mets put on an offensive clinic against the Cubs, uncharacteristically winning 19-1. Alas, one poor fan had missed the game. So he called his local newspaper to ask if the Mets had won that day. See, you couldn't just look it up on your phone back then, because the internet didn't exist yet. Anyway, he calls his local newspaper, probably the Post or the Daily News, to ask if the Mets had won. "Hey, Joe Schmo calling here. I missed the game today. Did the Mets win?" "Did the Mets win? They scored 19 runs!" "But did they win?" Gets me every time. My second story here also occurred in 1964, with the opening of Shea Stadium. Remember a few minutes ago when I told you about how Pedro Martinez and the Mets infield got soaked from the Shea Stadium sprinklers errantly going off? Well, that story reminded me of this one, so I wanted to make sure I got to it. On April 17th, 1964, Shea Stadium opened its gates for the first time. Just barely in time for the home opener. So barely in time, in fact, that a jurisdictional dispute between an electrical workers and telephone workers unions, Local 3 and Local 1106, meant that on opening day, none of the stadium's telephones or telegraphs worked. The stadium was built next to LaGuardia Airport, so fans often complained of the noise from airplanes constantly taking off and landing. On top of that, the parking capacity proved to be inadequate, and massive backups of traffic occurred an hour and a half before the game. But the worst of all was this. Shea Stadium was built on what essentially used to be a garbage dump, on marshland, a swamp. The day before the home opener, it had rained heavily, and the brand new sod was apparently so wet and swampy that groundskeepers were sinking down to their ankles. From the home opener forward, the stadium regularly had problems with plumbing and drainage. Pipes burst from time to time, the press box leaked, and the dugouts often smelled like swamp water. After heavy rains, water sometimes flowed down the steps from the clubhouse runway to the dugout. 40-something odd years later, nothing had really changed. Okay, we've strayed a little bit away from the topic I set for this episode, but I think that's okay. Let's jump back in with the 2024 Mets. We left off right here. The Mets have gone on a sensational run and have now swept the Yankees in 2 games. Baseball players are superstitious. Many baseball fans are too. Collectively, we like to rally around seemingly inconsequential things when their presence correlates with the team's success. One of the earliest examples is the rally cap, when a player wears their hat inside out or backwards or something in order to will their team to victory. Funnily enough, the rally cap has been a part of baseball since as long ago as the 1940s, but it was actually popularized by Mets fans in 1985 and 1986, who would wear their hats inside out when the team was down to summon a comeback victory. Over the course of baseball's long history, plenty of other teams have had their own rallies surrounding things, most often animals who accidentally find their way onto the field. There's been rally cats, rally squirrels, rally pigeons, rally rats, and even a rally mantis. Grimace's first pitch on June 12th can absolutely be considered a rally animal, I guess. But it's important to remember that these rally animals, or objects or creatures, are just superstitions after all. So what's really the reason the Mets are performing so well out of nowhere? I'll tell you what I think. It's this guy. This is Jose Iglesias. He's a second baseman who's been in the league since 2011, most notably with the Detroit Tigers, but also with the Red Sox, the Reds, the Orioles, the Angels, the Rockies, the Marlins, and the Padres, though he only played in AAA for the latter 2 teams. The Mets signed him to a minor league contract in December of last year. He hit well at AAA Syracuse and was brought up to the majors on May 31st. You see where I'm going with this? When Iglesias came up, the vibes of the team immediately shifted. And it's because Jose Iglesias is actually also a Latin pop star by the name of Candelita. In early June, after some pressure from JD Martinez, Iglesias' former teammate from Detroit, he previewed his song OMG for his Mets teammates, and it instantly became a hit within the clubhouse. They started to play the song after their wins, they would play it in the dugout, and players even sang the song whenever they hit a home run, which eventually led to the Mets, during their homestand against the Marlins and Padres, to start playing the song over the stadium speakers as a home run celebration, getting fans involved as well. This series of events eventually culminated in Jose Iglesias, as Candelita of course, performing the song live on June 28th at Citi Field, after a Mets win against the Houston Astros. I prefer to think of the June 2024 Mets as the Candelita era, or the OMG era, as opposed to that of Grimace. Maybe they work together, but you cannot deny that the vibes of this team at this point in the season are at an all-time high. And it's gotta be one of the most Metsy ways to go on a run. Unfortunately, the Mets lost the following 2 games against Houston, their first series loss in a month since getting swept by the Dodgers at the end of May. But still, this June surge has completely turned around the Mets' 2024 season. But let's backtrack a bit. There's one more thread I want to explore here, and that's the relationship between the Mets and the Yankees. There are a few crosstown rivals in Major League Baseball. Obviously, the Mets and Yankees are one, but there's also the Dodgers and Angels, and the Cubs and the White Sox, and if you want to get really technical, you can put some other teams in the crosstown rivals category as well. The Cardinals and Royals, the Orioles and Nationals, and the Athletics and Giants. But those teams technically play in different cities. In terms of teams that play in the same city, the Mets and Yankees are the only ones that have played each other in the World Series. The Yankees are, of course, the most storied franchise, bar none, in all of Major League Baseball. They hold the league record, by far, of 27 championships. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, etc., etc. Their lore runs deep. The Mets are the Mets. You should have some understanding of this by now. They've always been the little brother. Their franchise history couldn't shine the shoes of the Yankees. And that reason is why Mets fans tend to take the rivalry much more seriously than Yankees fans do. I think to many Yankee fans, the Mets aren't even a rival. Despite what you may see from radio personalities and viral internet videos, I think most Yankee fans would even root for the Mets to a certain extent if they were doing well while the Yankees weren't. The same cannot be said for most Mets fans. We're bitter and we're spiteful. Comparison is the thief of joy. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over the 2000 World Series between these two teams right now. Again, that will be saved for a later episode. I will, however, highlight one particular moment from it. It's Game 1, the Mets' Al Leiter on the mound versus the Yankees' Andy Pettitte. Both pitchers have World Series pedigree. Pettitte with the Yankees' previous 3 appearances, and Leiter not with the Mets, but with the Blue Jays in 1992 and 93, and the Marlins in 97. It's an all-out pitching duel, but finally, in the top of the 6th, the Mets have something going. Rookie outfielder Timo Perez hits a single to center field. The Yankees get 2 outs, a pop-up from Edgardo Alfonso, and a deep drive from Mike Piazza that just doesn't quite make it out. Next up is the Mets cleanup hitter Todd Zeile, and on an 0-2 count, he gets all of Andy Pettitte's changeup and hammers it to deep left field. It looked like a home run the second it got off the bat to just about everyone in the stadium. Everyone in the stadium, unfortunately, including Timo Perez. Perez immediately began lightly jogging, thinking he could trot on home off of Zeile's blast. The ball hit the top of the outfield wall and bounced right back into the stadium, where it was cleanly fielded by David Justice. Perez didn't start hustling until the ball bounced back in, and he was promptly thrown out at home for the 3rd out of the inning. The Yankees took Game 1 4-3 in 12 innings. They then won Game 2, 4, and 5 for a gentleman's sweep. It was especially frustrating for the Mets and their fans because each game was only won by a run or 2. The entire series was close despite ending in 5 games. But alas, bragging rights had been won, and not by the Metsies. But we're not done here. In the years following the Subway Series, the Yankees only trended downward. The Yankees lost the World Series in 2001, lost in the ALDS in 2002, lost in the World Series again in 2003, and then were bounced out of the ALDS or ALCS in each of the following 4 seasons, until finally missing the playoffs entirely in 2008. The Mets, of course, comparatively speaking, did much worse over this stretch. They missed the playoffs from 2001 to 2005, had a heartbreaking ALCS loss in 2006, and then had their 2 infamous September collapses in 2007 and 2008. However, it's important to note that the Mets were projected to be good those years. You can't collapse or fall short of expectations without having those expectations set in the first place, you know? If it wasn't for the 2007 meltdown, David Wright might have won NL MVP. So yes, despite 2 end-of-season disasters, the Mets were still projected to be good in 2009, especially after bringing in all-star closer Francisco Rodriguez to bolster their bullpen. The Yankees also made some roster additions, notably CC Sabathia and Mark Teixeira. They were also projected to be much better than their disappointing 2008. The 2 franchises came to a head once again on June 12th, exactly 15 years prior to Grimace's first pitch, to the day. It's the bottom of the 9th, 2 outs with 2 men on, at Yankee Stadium. The Mets are up 8-7, and Francisco Rodriguez is on the mound to close out the game. He faces off against Yankees third baseman Alex Rodriguez. 3-1 pitch. A-Rod pops up, and in a show of frustration, slams his bat on the ground. Mets shortstop Luis Castillo tracks the ball to shallow right field. He paces to the right, and then a little more, and then a little more, and then... Not only does Castillo completely misplay the catch, in the heat of the moment he hastily tosses the ball to second base, as Teixeira, hustling all the way from first, crosses home plate for the walk-off win. The Mets' season spiraled out of control shortly after that, as they once again caught the injury bug. The Yankees went on to win their 27th World Series title. That error just about sums up the relationship between the Mets and the Yankees. The Yanks, especially during this time, were the big bad villains of the baseball world, dubbed the Evil Empire. But the Mets were no Jedi. They put up no meaningful fight. They were zapped into oblivion like Alderaan, and that was that. The bloopers and gaffes committed by the Mets over their team's history range from silly moments we can laugh about years later to franchise-altering catastrophes. They are just one of the many factors that make up Mets misery.